May 10th, 2023. Jessica, will you please take roll?
Elisa de Monteblanco.
Here.
Barbie Miner.
Here.
Alfredo Moreno.
I'm here.
Heidi Edwards.
Here.
Tia Ping.
Here.
Wonderful. We are going to talk about district budget priority fiscal year 23-24 update, as well as crime prevention. And it looks like Aisha's ready to go.
Yes, good evening. I will kick us off on this topic. Aisha Panis, your Deputy General Manager here at the district. And on the next slide, I think, we'll hold on the next slide just now. I'll kick off on the title slide, sorry. We're here tonight because we wanted to follow up with you from our March and April work sessions. We promised that tonight's presentation will be much shorter, but we did promise that we would come back to you with some historic research. And we wanted to specifically take a look at THPRD's historic use of operating levies. And in order to do that, we need to spend a little bit of time on Oregon's taxation history. So we have some information for you. We know it's a complicated topic, and we've done our best to shorten it to give you the context that you need for this ongoing discussion that we're having. But we have Holly here tonight who is going to take us through a quick overview. So next slide for Holly, please.
Okay, y'all, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little nervous to give this presentation this evening, so send me some good vibes and be nice to me. They made me read really dense taxation history stuff, so I have done my best to summarize it. Jared would give this presentation, but I wanted to do it to have comedy relief and to try to make it a little fun. But we can only scratch the surface of my knowledge. So when it gets challenging, we're going to Jared for questions. And I'm here to try to take a really boring topic, condense 20 years of history into 10 minutes and make it fun. So let's start. This is a document that I used for reference. You can go to the Oregon Department of Revenue and check it out. It's 11 pages of dense reading. And what it does is it gives us a history of Oregon's taxation. Oh, am I off camera? Oh my goodness, y'all, it's because my system is broken. So I'm gonna have to be off camera and you're not gonna see my face. I apologize, my home camera has gone dead. I need a new camera. It's coming via Jeff Bezos's amazing company thing. So I'm a day away. Okay, so here's the story. The first line of this is what you need to know to set the stage. Oregon's taxation history has been the same relatively for most of our history. So from pre-statehood until the 1990s, it was essentially the same. Now on the next slide, we're going to see there was a major voter initiative tax reform effort that started in the 90s with Measure 5. But phase 1 is from before we were a state through the 1990s. And at that time, we had a pure levy-based property tax system. Each taxing district, and there were 1,400 of us at that time, so 1,400 local governments and governments acting within Oregon, all calculated their own needs, their own levy rates. It was based on the full real market value. There was no concept of assessed value. And levies were limited to a 6% growth per year. So when we get further in the presentation, you'll see THPRD had a history of going out for 3 years serial levies, and that was because that was the system that we had. Then comes along phase 2. Measure 5 is a voter initiative that the voters brought forward and passed. It took effect in 91, 92. It was phased in, so those phases came into effect over time, and it across the board cut taxes 51% from 1991-92 levels. It also is the first time it introduces this whole concept of compression, that scary word that people talk about. And compression, this formula that we still know today, is where it says you can spend up to $5 per 1,000 in real market value for school taxes, and you have a cap of $10 per 1,000 in real market value for all of your taxes and on your individual property. And that applied to operating, not to bonds, which is still true today. Bonds are outside of this. And if you hit compression, if you get over those maximums, then things start to drop off. And it was a hybrid system of both levies and establishing permanent rates. Now, on the next slide, we'll see that we move into phase 3. In November of 1996, the voters of Oregon wanted more property tax reform, and they passed another measure. It was called Measure 47. Measure 47 would have rolled back property taxes to 90% of 1995-96 levels. Unfortunately, Measure 47 had a number of technical complications to it, so it could not be enacted. It put the legislature in a bind where they needed to meet the spirit of what the voters wanted, but they had to do it in a way that could be implemented. So they created Measure 50. This was a legislative fix, so not a voter fix, but a legislative fix, where the legislature said, we're going to make happen what the voters wanted in Measure 47, but we're going to do it in a way that can be implemented. That was the goal. So what did Measure 50 do? What do we live in today? Measure 50 established the whole concept that we understand today of assessed value versus real market value. So we're no longer taxed on real market value, we're taxed on this assessed value. And that is what they level set back to dropping to 90% of that 95-96 tax rates to, again, control the growth of property taxes. They also established a 3% cap. So property taxes, your permanent tax rate, could only go up 3% a year. The only exceptions to that were new development. So that could be property within your taxing district that is brand new development, that's redeveloped, or property that gets annexed into your territorial boundaries. That's how you could have growth outside that 3%. Measure 50 also rolled all of those existing levies, right? So we had levies. That's how we operated. Those levies got rolled up and taken into consideration in Measure 50, and that became the base of our permanent tax rate. So that's how THPRD had a permanent tax rate established. And what they said at that time is, if the permanent tax rates are not enough to fund operations, then you need to go to additional local option levies. But these permanent tax rates were seen as our permanent operating rates. Now on the next slide, we'll see that they really did have a deep discussion, right? They were very much aware that the permanent tax rates might not keep up over time. And the discussion then was, in the spirit of respecting what the voters have called for, which was local control, ability to control the growth of taxes, they saw local governments passing local option levies as an additional tool of local control, really putting into the hands of the people who live in these communities whether they wanted to increase rates beyond that permanent rate that was set through Measure 50. Now, one thing that I keep thinking about, and Felicita, I wish you could see my face. I'm sorry for my camera glitch, but I keep thinking of the slide from last time of all the orange circles, right, coming at our budget. Each one of those orange circles has got a complex and rich history, right? We just went through 20 years of Oregon tax history here in, like, I don't know, 6 minutes. Doug's the one who always times me. So each one of those circles has a lot of complexity to it, right? And you can see how complex this one circle is. So it's not like one of these issues got us to our situation today. It's the combination, right, of all of this stuff. Now on the next slide, we wanted to share with you, and I have to give a shout out to our administrative specialist, Kristen Preston. She dug through some dusty old records and went to the county and got some election records. And, you know, we spent enough staff time to go back to the 80s and said, we're good. We got enough history here, but you can see the trend. Every 3 years, we had operating levies. We went to our voters. That was how we ran the district. We passed. The last time we went out for an operating levy, you can see it did not pass. It was an interesting time. I will say a few things about this one. Thank you, Jared and Kristen, for your research. This levy was not an operating levy. It was really much more capital, right? So that's something that we know from our research and from the work that we've done. Hard to get people to vote for capital. Really need a good mix of operating for support a lot of times. So that's a big reason why we think it failed. Another reason is just time and place. This was an era in our taxation history. Almost everything that went forward at that time failed. There was a lot of confusion over these back-to-back voter changes or voter initiative changes. And I think people were honestly confused about what was going on. But that's the story. So on the final slide, we'll turn it over to Aisha.
Right. So we wanted to bring this information, and a special shout out to Holly for going through all of this research that was sourced from the county and from folks here at the district. But I know it was a painful process. So thank you, Holly, for that. But we wanted to bring
dry and boring. But it's
dry
okay.
and boring. There it is. So we wanted to have this information in front of you because it's part of this bigger conversation about what we're contemplating moving into. And we acknowledge it's complicated, and we don't need to understand all of the details about it. At least we don't need all of the details for everyone to understand, but we do have a solid understanding about what the history means, what it means for the context of our discussion, how we've gotten to the point we're at right now, and to inform the options that we have going forward. So we wanted to pause here and see if there are any questions that you have. And as Holly mentioned, Jared is here for all the very complicated ones. Yes. I thought I saw Tia's hand, but it looks like Alfredo's hand. Maybe Tia, then Alfredo.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I pressed it too many times. Wait, can we, for that 2002 levy thing that failed, you said it was for capital. What does that mean exactly? Like, we're just trying to get more funds for like our general fund, or
So I think, and Holly can correct me if I'm wrong, but typically we have capital. When we talk about that, we're talking about the durable, constructed kinds of things that we do with the funds. So the 2008 bond that the district did was a capital bond to make capital improvements, those enduring physical improvements. Operating is what would pay for staffing and pay to run programs here at the district.
So the 2001, or the one that failed in 2002 was just like a regular, like a capital bond, or like what we passed in 2008.
It was a levy, but it was paying for capital. So it was construction-y stuff.
Okay.
Right. And so there is the ability to pay for some level of capital within an operating levy, but perhaps the balance was off, that mix was off, and that was potentially one of the reasons why it was not a success.
Okay. And so then the only way that it affected the district was we just couldn't build the projects that we were anticipating or wanting to build, but it had nothing to do with operations.
Yep.
Okay.
Alfredo?
Yeah. I was curious as I was looking at that history, obviously. So that's the last time we went out for a levy, was the kind of confusing one that we're talking about that failed.
Yep.
Was there other times that previous boards that the district wanted to go out, or any other thoughts of going out that other boards said no to, or anything like that happened in between that?
Yeah, I'm going to turn that to Doug.
Yeah.
Yes, that's certainly one. There were certainly discussions over the years, but the fact of the matter is, as Holly indicated, what was very unique about the final taxation structure we ended up in is we had automatically 3%, no questions asked, plus growth and or annexation. In our case, there was some annexation, but growth was a serious topic. There were years we were growing 6-7% in operating funds because we had a lot of development in the district. More recently, of course, it has tightened up. North Bethany is adding to it. And of course, Cooper Mountain has some already and more to come. So that certainly isn't going to hurt us. But of course, the ongoing challenge is with the number of new parks we've added, new trails, facilities, that adds to the operating structure. And a lot of those factors that were impacting our budget today are outside of growth in assets certainly has had an impact, but cost of living, the class comp subject areas, just factors that no one anticipated coming into play at the level they've come into play.
Okay. So this was a deal where there just wasn't the urgency or the need to do it. It wasn't an issue where the district staff wanted to, and other boards didn't go that way or anything like that. So, okay.
No, yeah,
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.
you bet.
We're at our 15 minutes, but I just want to close, if no one else has any more comments, with gratitude for the board. Thank you for asking questions about the history and having us do this information, because honestly, I think there's really good context and background information that I know our community is going to ask us about moving forward. So it was really good this month to have the time to go through this exercise and dig into this history.
Did Heidi get to ask her question?
Just real quick, and we don't have to answer it now. I am curious, knowing the cost of staffing and benefits has grown exponentially over time for most organizations. Do we have a rough, maybe we can get some numbers regarding what percentage of our budget is personnel budgets? I think we have that maybe in our budget meeting and such.
We did, and in our last meeting, we were looking at personnel services, right? And how they represented today 59% of our budget.
Okay.
And if we keep on the trajectory that we're going, like in 5 years, it's going to be around 86 to 87%.
Because I know a lot of other budgets are like at that 80 to 90% of their budget is personnel and benefits. So thank you for jogging my memory of what that number was. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Helpful, and I think that was a great summation of a very complicated, problematic tax system in the state of Oregon.
You did great, Holly.
Next
Thank
up, we have
you.
crime prevention through environmental design.
Yes, and thank you. I will kick us off for that. I'm actually here tonight with two of my colleagues from the Park Services Division, Tim Bonin, our interim design and development manager, and John Campbell, our maintenance operations manager. And we're here to talk with you about an approach that informs how we design, construct, and care for our public spaces. And this is called crime prevention through environmental design, or because that's a lot to say, we refer to it as CPTED. So on the next slide, I'll provide just a brief overview of CPTED. And this is governed by the International CPTED Association, which was founded back in 1996. The approach uses urban and architectural design to create safe and accessible community spaces for all users. The primary principles of design include minimizing pinch points, opening sight lines, and doing so by removing visual and vegetative barriers. On the next slide, you'll see that CPTED is not intended to exclude people from places by erecting physical barriers to enjoying the park or installing cameras or limiting accessibility in any way. On this next slide, you will see that we've added language to the district's recently adopted comprehensive plan, and that states that we're going to be using best practices like CPTED to design new and renovated sites in order to deliver upon our district goal of accessible and safe places for our users to enjoy. Now, the following slide shows an example of how our CPTED principles have been utilized at Schiffler Park in Central Beaverton. And so if we can go to that next slide, we've got a couple of images, before and after, to share with you. And on the left, you'll see the before photo. And what we wanted to do at Schiffler Park was in response to a lot of concerns that we had heard from neighbors about activities that were not desired within the neighborhood. And so on the right side, you can see what we did to enhance and open up those sight lines into and through the park. And we wanted to do this, and we did it intentionally, and we had our safety services staff actually go door to door while this vegetation was being cleared and that underbrush in the park was cleared out. And they were going to speak to neighbors regarding the vandalism that we had experienced there and a lot of after hours activities that were happening in the park. And every person that our safety services staff spoke with were expressing their appreciation to our maintenance staff who had been clearing these underbrush hiding spaces. And so I just wanted to kind of show you what that experience was at Schiffler. This was a anecdote shared with me by Mark Pierce, our safety services manager, who is enjoying some well-deserved vacation time this week and was unable to be a part of this presentation. But we wanted to kind of show you how this was applied in a certain location. So the next few slides, starting on the next one, we'll go to Tim, who is going to talk to you about how our design and development department uses these CEPTID principles. So Tim.
Yes, thank you, Aisha. Good evening, board members. I'd like to talk about the 7 principles of design, of crime prevention through environmental design. The first one is activation. It's increased use of a space and the interaction of people. Surveillance is casual and active observation within a space or from the periphery looking in. Ownership is a combination of activation and surveillance, meaning the people who use the space and who observe the space have a sense of ownership of wanting to be in that space. Stakeholder management is the maintenance and the care of the space. It's making repairs quickly and keeping the park or the space clean and well maintained. Legibility is wayfinding. It's how people feel when they move through the space, that when they enter the space, they have an idea of how they can navigate and move around. Territoriality is a clarity of space. It means like a space, think of spaces like public versus private. So if somebody goes to a space, are they in a public park or are they in somebody's really large backyard? So people want to be able to go to that space and feel a sense of, well, I can be here, it's a public space and I can use it. And vulnerability is a perception of fear or crime. So again, we want, if there's absence of these other 6 principles, lack of those other principles, people tend to feel more vulnerable and uncomfortable in using those spaces. So in design development, we use these principles, we weave them early on into the design of the concept plan, as well as through the process of finishing up those construction drawings. So in the next slide, we'll go over a few examples. So this is Vista Brook Park. In the black and white plan was the existing park prior to the 2008 bond initiative. The orange arrow points to the entryway, which is the upper photo on the left-hand side. And so when you evaluate this space using these crime prevention principles, you can see surveillance, legibility, and vulnerability rise to the top. And when programming or reprogramming a space like this, there's also an opportunity to change the behavior of the space, change the behavior of the users of the space. For instance, we replace full court basketball courts with individual basketball courts to change competitive play to leisure play. Could you click the slide once, please? So as you can see here in the final concept plan, the preferred concept plan, we've taken the basketball courts and separated them into individual courts so that you could still play, so 3-on-3, but you also could have more independent play between groups. And when I talk about changing, as I mentioned, changing the behavior of the space, with this park, we added this looped path to the park. So it created an opportunity for people to spend more time in the park for those who like to exercise and walk around. Matter of fact, we also added, and more recently, fitness equipment along the perimeter of that path as well. So we've changed the behavior of it. We've activated it by adding more diverse amenities to the site. And as you can see in the lower photo today, compare the two, when you approach the park, it's very open. You can look into the park, you can see through the park. And we talk about wayfinding, we have our sign. You can see it small over to the lower left-hand corner. Our A1 sign, it has the pictogram. So when people enter the park, they can see what types of activities are there. And that gives them the opportunity to know how much time they want to spend in the park or they want to move on to another park. So again, we help encourage that wayfinding and help them feel comfortable when in the space, when they're in those spaces. And in this morning, even though it was cold and rainy, there was a few dog walkers here and a jogger that was just making laps around the park. So even when there's nobody in the park, there's somebody out there using the park. So in the next slide, we'll look at Mountain View Champions Park. I'd like to focus on the early concept plan in the lower left, and talk about that and how this was laid out and how these crime prevention principles were applied. Now, the major elements of this park, the double synthetic field, the parking lot, the Champions 2 field, and the baseball field, those are big pieces. We couldn't really move those around too much. They were sort of set pieces to the park. But the focus of our design team was the main plaza area and the playground, because that was the hub of this park. And part of our design team, we collaborated with our internal design team, our consultant, and as well as the Access for All Steering Committee, which are the caregivers for people who experience disabilities. And the two primary principles I'd say that we focused on with the design of this park was legibility and surveillance. And again, you think about legibility as wayfinding. What was important to caregivers is when they came to these parks, they had to have an immediate understanding of the layout of the park, because they have groups of people that they're with, and they have to know what are the active spaces in the park, what are the quiet spaces, where's their shelter if needed, where are the restrooms, and that they had a central location to go to, which is that surveillance piece or surveillance principle. They need to be able to be somewhere in the park where they could see, to have that 360 view. So that was part of the design of this park, was actually to gently raise the parking lot into the plaza area. So that plaza and play area sits about 4 or 5 feet above the rest of the park. So they can look out and down if there are individuals down on the field. Maybe there's a game at the Champions 2 field. Maybe there's an individual too in the playground. Other people are using other parts of the park or over in the quiet forest area. They had that view, had that ability to look all the way around the park and be able to make sure everybody was safe. But these crime prevention principles aren't crime proof. If you look back again at that early concept plan in that forested area just to the left of the Champions 2 field, there's that little brown square. That's a shelter. When we designed that forested area, we designed it with a soft surface trail, and we thought we'd have a shelter in there too as a quiet space as part of the Champions 2 park, and also help serve what was called Lawndale Park further to the west. We used our crime prevention principles for clearing all the underbrush out of there to have clear sight lines through the park, but it still didn't, really thwart the crime that occurs in the evenings. There was vandalism in this area prior to us designing this new park, and that's continued on. We've also had that with our restrooms. So I've had people breaking into the restrooms as well. But we've learned from here is that we've upgraded our restrooms from the restrooms that we built here at Mountain View. We've actually used different lock systems for Cedar Hills Park. So we continue to improve upon these designs to make them to minimize as much crime as possible. So go to the next slide, please. This is Lavra East Park. Remember this park, you adopted the concept plan back in November 2021. Well, it's about to start construction in about 30 days. So with this site, this was a residence, an old residence for about 90 years, and it had a different purpose, right? It was meant to be secluded and private. And so, as you can see in the photos from the street view, you can't look into the park. So you can't look into the site because of the huge hedge of rhododendrons across the front of it. And if you're in the park in that lower photo, that interior park view looking east, you would feel very vulnerable, right? You'd be at the very back of the park, and the only way out is straight ahead. And if you can't see around you, that wouldn't be a space you would feel comfortable in. You wouldn't want to be in that. So part of the design was opening up the park so people were comfortable within the park. We even had, as part of the design, and one of the reasons why there's a shelter in the middle was our conversations with the community. Was one community member in particular was like, I want to be able to be in the middle of the park. I want to be able to see who is coming into the park. So I sort of have that hub similar to like Mountain View as well. Again, it's about safety. It is about, again, legibility for people to move through the park as we design the park. And so, we've used these principles for the design of Lavra East Park, and we're excited to get this park underway soon. And then the last slide, I just want to show you Unity Park. Here's a comment received on Unity Park after we built it. This is our youth sports field, which was once a neglected vacant lot and is now an active space for the community to enjoy. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John, who's going to talk about the principles of surveillance and stakeholder management.
Good evening, board members. I'm going to talk to you tonight about how we integrated SEPTID practices and park maintenance practices and what we learned during the process. Next slide. Our goals were to help make our patrons feel safe and welcome as they entered and used our parks. Our primary focus was to work on the park entrances first, and then inside the park second. As we started navigating through this process, we found opportunities to also create additional standards. In this photo on the left, you'll see that we replaced our bollard style entrances with split rail fencing, which is much aesthetically pleasing. We used our chippers to recycle green waste on site as we collected it, rather than hauling it back and buying new chips. Next slide, please. In this slide, you'll see that what we learned from our patrons was they did not feel comfortable walking in through confined or trapped spaces when using our narrow pathways. So we created a pathway edge standard, and that is to keep the vegetation cut back to a minimum of 2 feet on both sides, remove understory, and lift overhead trees up to 8 feet. It created more open space, better visibility, and natural light throughout our narrow pathways. Next slide, please. At this site, we learned at Highton Park, we learned that from the parents that they always wanted to be able to see their children while using the parks. We created a trim limb standard, which means lifting trees up to a minimum of 8 feet off the ground. Doing so provides better sight lines throughout most of the parks where they can see their children. Next slide. Trails and pathways at Matrix Hill. We learned from this steep and winding path at Matrix Hill, which is used by different people on how they recreate, bikes, scooters, skateboards, joggers, and walkers, by removing the brush, vegetation, and raising the tree limb has allowed the users to see much further ahead in both directions. Next slide, please. Trails and pathways at Sexton Mountain. We learned that this pathway is a popular place for joggers, often jogging alone, and for children to learn to ride their bikes without being on a street. Keeping the vegetations cut down, moved away from the path, provides a safer and welcoming place to recreate. Next slide. Jackie Houston Park. We learned from families that may recreate in different areas of the park, but still want to be able to see their family members if they are in different locations. The photos you see here are taken from the upper level of the park, which has a dog run, a small grass area, and a community garden. The lower level has a parking lot, a playground, shelter, walking path, and open grass area. We want to make sure all areas of the park have open sight lines. Users can see all areas of the park from top to bottom sections at all times. Next slide. This is a comment that one of our park maintenance techs, Colby Anderson, heard while he was working at Jackie Houston. As we were working at Jackie Houston Park, a mother, daughter, and their dog were enjoying the dog run. The daughter asked her mother if she could go play on the playground. Her mother told her yes, but stay where I can see you. That's why it's so important for us to make sure that all different levels have open sight lines and they can see the different areas that people recreate.
Thank you, John. We know we've gone a little bit over time, but this was intended to simply provide an initial sort of briefing on how we use CEPTED here at the district and answer any questions that you might have. If you have them now, we're happy to answer them. If you'd like to bring them forward another time, that would be totally fine as well. So please let us know your preference.
Can I just say real quick, I just really appreciate this. I think I know I was the one who asked for this, so I appreciate it. When I heard this term for the first time, I got slightly paranoid because I work in Old Town, and so I see hostile design everywhere, and it breaks my heart. And I was so afraid that this was somewhat like that, and it's clear that it's not. Our board is, 4 folks. I'm the only non-parent, and I use the park as a 5'2", 5'3" on a good day woman, and so I just like safety is so critical to all of us due to various identities and lived experience, and so this is great. And there was a level of detail in here that I mean, I didn't know you guys were cutting trees at 8 feet. That makes perfect sense. This is all great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think we can wrap up work session and head to executive session. Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thank you.